Flower anatomy?
Yeah. So your diagrams are actually all found in your book, like at the end of the chapters, they'll have those little questions at the end. So the diagrams that I have, I'll have a diagram for the parts of the flower. I'll have a diagram for the uptake of water in the root, showing the apoplastic and symplastic root in the Casparian strip. I've got a cross-section of a woody yew dicot that you have to label the parts of. That's in your book at the end of chapter 35. And then I've got the phylogenetic tree of the plants showing where the different characteristics appear. So all those are in your book. So if you do those little test yourself questions at the end of each chapter, that's probably a good idea to do those.
At the end of each chapter.
Yeah. So they have the answers at the back, so so you can kind of quiz yourself with those.
Do you mind repeating that last one? The last diagram?
It's the phylogenetic tree of the plant. So you're going to need to know like where did the plants get vascular tissue, where's the seeds and stuff like that. It'll be kind of like this thing, but for plants. All right. So you should know these are the basic characteristics of plants. So you should know these. This is what sets plants apart from all the other kingdoms. And you should know that the closest living relative to land plants are the charophytes. So those guys there. Okay, so these are other characteristics of plants. They have apical meristems, so you should know what that is. And you should know about their reproductive cycle, which is the alternation of generations. So there's the life cycle there. So definitely study that. And then later on, when we have the different groups of plants, you can see kind of like how they vary from that general pattern there. So that's life cycle of the plant. All right, then, so they have a cuticle, they have mycorrhizae and secondary compounds. You should know what all those things are. Okay, then we talk about the different groups of plants. So for each group of plants, you should know like the kind of plants that are found in each group. Like that mosses are a type of non-vascular plant, and ferns are a type of seedless vascular plant, and so on. And then we've got the gymnosperms and the angiosperms. Okay, so bryophytes, they don't have vascular tissue, they don't have seeds, they don't have any of those other things that later plants have. And that includes liverworts, hornworts, and mosses. Okay. So study the moss life cycle. It'll probably help to keep in mind how it's just a variation off the general plant life cycle there. So you should know like what the female and male gametophytes are like, and the Antheridia and Archedonia, and how they fertilize and all that kind of stuff. Okay, and then also for each group of plants, if there's some kind of important fact about them, you should know. You know, something they're useful for, or something they're important in Earth's history, or something like that. You should know that stuff. So for the bryophytes, you know, they were the first plants on land. That's one important thing about them. And then also, sphagnum moss is a very economically important moss. You use it, it's used for a lot of different things. And also, it has, you know, artifacts like dead people in it and stuff like that. All right. So then, our next group of plants are the seedless vascular plants. So they have vascular tissue, but they don't have seeds. So club moss, spike moss, quillworts, ferns, horsetails, and whisk ferns. So the main sort of example of these plants is a fern. And so, so you should know that these were the main plants during the Carboniferous period. And they have vascular tissue, which we talked about in a later chapter. So you should know the life cycle of a fern, which is right there. And so the forests we had during the Carboniferous period were full of seedless vascular plants, and they're what ended up forming the coal deposits that we use for energy today. So that was around 300 million years ago. Okay, then we have the seed plants, and hopefully you know all about seeds and what seeds are like, and pollen. And seeds and pollen allowed seed plants to not depend on water for reproduction. So that's the next chapter. So we have the seed plants next. Okay. So the two groups of seed plants are the gymnosperms and the angiosperms. And they are heterosporous, they have ovules, and they have pollen. Okay, so you should probably study that chart. That's probably a good chart that kind of summarizes the 4 different groups of plants. And, let's see. Okay. Ovules, those become the seeds. And they also contain the female gametophytes. And then, so there's the ovule there. Then the pollen, that contains the male gametophytes. And when they get together, that's pollination, which produces the seed. Okay. You should also know the advantages that seeds give a plant. Okay, then we got the gymnosperms. There's 4 types of gymnosperms. You should know them. So you've got the cycads. You've got the ginkgo, just one species of that. You've got the gnetophytes. Those are those weird plants that have that, the netum, the ephedra, and the welwitschia. And then we have the conifers, and those are the gymnosperms that you are probably most familiar with, like pine trees and stuff. So, pine trees, fir trees, spruce trees, all those kind of things. Redwoods, that kind of thing. Okay, and then we have the life cycle of a pine as an example of the gymnosperm life cycle. So study that, how they reproduce. They got the pollen that blows in the wind. They got the seeds that blow in the wind. All that kind of stuff. Okay, then we have the flowering plants. And they have flowers, fruits, and double fertilization. And most plants are flowering plants. Okay, you should know the parts of the flower. That's going to be one of your diagrams.
Awesome.
So you should be able to draw that and label it. I will give you the words that you need to include, but you're going to need to draw the petals and the sepals and all that kind of stuff.
You have to draw it?
Yeah.
Can we paint it with watercolor? I'm just kidding. I'm kidding.
You just have to do a good enough job so I can tell what's supposed to be what. Yeah. Hopefully it's not too hard to draw a petal. So, I mean, you should have been drawing flowers since you were a little kid, right? So you should be able to handle anything. All right. So, fruits. Fruits develop from the ovaries of the flowers. So this part down here is what becomes the fruit. And fruits help the seeds to be dispersed in various ways. Mostly by animals. So talk about pollination some more. And double fertilization, you should know what that is. So this 2 sperm, one fertilizes the egg, one fertilizes the endosperm. Okay. So there's the angiosperm life cycle, so a bit more complicated. but really it's the same, basic plant life cycle. Okay, so then we have the different groups of angiosperms. We've got the basal angiosperms, the magnolias. Well, there's the basal angiosperms. The magnolias, the monocots, and the eudicots, or the dicots. And you should know how to tell the difference between a monocot and a eudicot, which we also covered in lab, so it was on your homework. So hopefully you know that by now. Okay, and then pollination is a way that a lot of animals pollinate flowers, and you don't have to know like the specific types of flowers that specific types of animals like, but just understand that different kinds of flowers are for different pollinators. Now you will need to know that if you want to do the extra credit, but the actual test is not quite that detailed. So you don't have to know that like hummingbirds like red or things like that. Just kind of understand how that works. Specific pollinators. Okay. And then fruits. So you have different fruits that are, so the different fruits are for different methods of spreading the seeds of the plant. Alright, and then some of the, just, know some of the stuff we get from plants that are important, like food, medicine, all that kind of stuff. Alright. Okay, so next. So this chapter here, this is chapter 35, this talks about root stems and leaves mainly. So, the basic structure of a plant. Okay, so you've got the basic structure of a plant here with the root system and the shoot system. So the roots, you should know the functions of the roots. This is a lot of stuff we covered in lab. And actually in lab, when we get to lab tests, we'll be way more detailed on this actually, like the different structures and stuff you find in the root. The lecture test will be more kind of just understanding the functions and how this stuff works. So, you got root hairs that absorb most of the stuff from the soil. Different modified roots. So I have a general idea of that. The stem with the nodes and the internodes and the buds and all that kind of stuff. So you should know that stuff. Different kinds of stems. So, study this some, but there's going to be a lot more of this on the lab test. Because on lab tests, I'll get to actually have like the slides and models and different fruits out and stuff like that. Since the lecture test is more written stuff, it'll be more kind of like knowing the functions of the different things than the structures.
Will it be mostly like multiple choice, or will it be some of it
be writing? It's going to be mostly multiple choice for your lecture test. Now for your lab test, it's going to be mostly short answer. You'll be answering questions about stuff you're going to be looking at in lab. But this test you're taking next time, it's going to be mostly multiple choice. And those few diagrams at the end that I already told you what those are.
Okay.
So we got our leaves here. Difference between a monocot and dicot leaf. That we went over in lab, really. So you might want to look over the labs that I've graded and handed back to you already. The homework, that will probably help. Let's see here. Got your 3 types of plant tissue. So you should know those.
Oh, the lab. Look back on the lab for the exam, or the lecture exam, or the lab exam.
For the upcoming exam on Thursday, since I've given you back the homework for lab 20 and 25, it'll probably be a good idea for you to look over those.
For the lecture exam.
Yeah, because it's the same kind of stuff.
Okay.
I mean, mainly you should concentrate on the, the lecture book and the slides and the review sheet I gave you.
Okay.
But, it's a lot of the same kind of stuff. So it might also help, definitely at least look at your homework and see like what you missed and understand why you missed it and stuff like that. So that, because it's the same stuff. I mean, so we've got our root stems and leaves here. So the structure of root stem and the leaf. So all those things, the epidermis, the cuticle, periderm, trichomes, you should know what all those are. Okay, and then we got our vascular tissue, and actually the next chapter is just all about vascular tissue, so we'll skip to that, and then you've got your ground tissue, which is your pith and your cortex. So when we get to the lab test, you'll need to actually, identify those things on the models over there. Okay, and then you have the different types of plant cells here. So just generally, parenchyma is just kind of your general plant cell. Parenchyma and sclerenchyma cells are both for support. And then you've got your xylem and your phloem. So, parenchyma, parenchyma, sclerenchyma. And then your xylem cells, your vessels and tracheids there. So there was a question on your homework about those. And your phloem cells there.
Xylem and phloem.
Yeah. So then you've got the vessel elements and tracheids of the xylem. You should know what those cells are like. And the sieve tube elements and companion cells of the phloem. And there were good questions about that in your homework for Lab 25, so that might be good to review. Okay, and then the meristems are where the plants grow. So you got apical meristems that produce primary growth, and lateral meristems that produce secondary growth. So there's how primary growth works. There's how secondary growth works. All right. So roots grow. And how side roots grow. So just have a general idea of how all that kind of stuff works for the test on Thursday. And then in the lab test will be kind of even more detailed, where you'll have to identify where the different parts of the root are. Just make sure I didn't miss anything. Okay. So we have how the leaves grow in the apical meristems. Okay. So this is kind of stuff that's more in the lab test, really. But for this lecture test, you need to at least know the basics of what these things are. All right. And then the leaves, you got the structure of a leaf. So know what the main structures of the leaf are and what they do, like the stomata and the epidermis and the mesophyll and all that kind of stuff. If I ask any questions about that. For the lab test, eventually you'll need to actually identify where all those things are on that leaf model. Okay. Then, understand how the cambium produces the secondary growth, makes the stem grow thicker. Okay, and one of your diagrams in your test on Thursday is going to be a piece of wood, and you're going to need to label the parts. That is a question that's in your book at the end of chapter 35, so you can test yourself doing that. And the answers are in the back of the book. And let's see, that's how the cambium works. Okay, you should tell the difference between early wood and late wood. So when you look at early wood, it has the big vessel elements, and it develops first, and then the late wood comes after, and it has the little thin tracheids. Okay, heartwood and sapwood. Heartwood's the older wood, sapwood's the newer wood. The cork cambium produces the outer cork of the bark of the tree. And that's that one. Okay. Right. So the next one's all about, this chapter is mostly about xylem and phloem and how they work. So, if y'all have any questions, feel free to interrupt me. Just go through all this. Okay, so let's see. So how things move through a plant. So on a cellular level, it moves using this proton pump. So hopefully this should be kind of review from Biology 1. So co-transport and all that kind of stuff is how the plants use the proton pump to move substances into the cell. Osmosis, again, hopefully review from Biology 1. The main thing about plants is that the pressure on the plant cells is more important in a plant than in us. So when we were talking about cells before, you mostly talked about solute concentrations inside and outside the cell. But in a plant, it's actually a combination of the solute and the pressure. And you have to add them together to get the water potential to tell where the water moves in a plant. All right. Okay, then we have the symplastic root and the apoplastic root, which is how things move through the plant's tissues. And so basically, that is going to be also on your test. Okay, so that diagram there. So you're going to have to draw in the apoplastic root and the symplastic root. And also, don't forget about the Casparian strip and how it has to move around the Casparian strip. Chapter 36. There it is close up. Okay, and then how water moves through the xylem. So I thought this was a pretty good video, so you might want to watch that again on Canvas, that shows how transpiration draws water up through the xylem of the plant. And also keep in mind that this doesn't require any energy use by the plant. It just happens on its own. Now, let's see. Now, kind of have an aside here about how plants lose so much water this way. And so you have plants that have adaptations through xerophytes to save water. So this is another thing that we talked about more in lab, but about the kind of things that plants do to conserve water. Okay, and then phloem. So understand the difference between how the xylem works and how the phloem works. The phloem is something that actually uses energy. The plant has to use ATP to pump the sugar into the phloem. And so you might want to watch these videos again, showing how phloem moves in the spring and the summer. Okay, so that's that chapter. The next chapter over plant nutrition and soil. Okay, so for the plant nutrients, you don't have to like memorize that whole thing or anything like that. The main things to get out of this is, for one thing, most of the plant is made of carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, and that's easy for the plant to get. That's water and carbon dioxide. So that's most of the plant, but then it needs these other things in small amounts to live. And so the main ones to remember, you should remember the NPK on a fertilizer packet, you know. So you've got nitrogen is N, K is potassium, P is phosphorus. And plants need those. And if they don't have enough, they can't live, so that's why they're in the fertilizer.
How come they don't use P for phosphorus and N for nitrogen?
Those are the periodic table
That's what they start with?
Things.
Okay.
Well, you know, like when you see them on a periodic table of elements, N is nitrogen, P is phosphorus, and for some reason K is potassium. I don't know why. Maybe because P was already taken or something.
Oh, yeah.
But it's like in a different language, yeah, so it's like in Latin. So some of the elements on periodic table are not in English. It's like gold is AU, and it's like, I guess that comes from Latin. So iron is Fe, so barium or something, yeah. So that's why. That's what the NP and K are, though. Those are periodic table things.
Are you taking chemistry?
All right. Yeah. You should take chemistry.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So NPK, plants need those. Also the soil. You should understand like what makes a healthy soil. So a healthy soil needs to provide enough air spaces for the plants, enough water spaces in the soil to hold water for the roots to get. And it should have, so that's, mainly due to the soil's texture. It should also have a lot of organic matter. That's good. The topsoil is the good part of the soil that has all the goodies in it. So lots of organic matter, lots of worms and stuff is all good for soil. So you should know about that. Cation exchange, you should know what that all is. So that's how the plants get the cations out of the soil, and there's a video about that. So a soil that has a good cation exchange capacity means that the plant is able to get these cations out easily. All right, nitrogen fixation, another important thing. So that's why we need nitrogen fixing bacteria to get nitrogen into the plants, and then the plants we can eat them and get nitrogen into us. And so the main group of plants that can fix nitrogen in their roots are legumes. So beans and peas, they have that rhizobium bacteria in their roots, like the peas there. And that is why farmers will plant like soybeans or peas or something like that to replenish their soil. Okay, then we have the mycorrhizae. Kind of mentioned that a little bit before, but that's what they look like. They're fungus that grows on the plant's roots and helps the plant to absorb nutrients better. Okay, and then just kind of in general, understand some of the issues with soil conservation and farming and all that. So irrigation is one. You want to not waste too much water with irrigation, because then that kind of thing happens. Fertilizers, another thing. You have to apply fertilizers, and it can cause pollution to the environment and stuff like that. And organic fertilizers work better. And you want to prevent soil erosion, because topsoil is an important resource. So doing things that prevent soil erosion. Okay, and
the no-till.
Yeah, no-till.
Plant in between.
No-till, yeah, that's when you plant the new seeds in between the old dead plants. You don't plow them up between plantings. Yeah, so that's a good way to reduce soil erosion, and contour plowing and stuff like that. Okay, and then we have these special types of plants. So you've got the epiphytes that grow on other plants, but they don't actually like suck anything out of the other plants, like ball moss. You have there's an epiphyte there. You have parasitic plants that do suck stuff out of the plant they're growing on, like mistletoe and dodder. And then you have the carnivorous plants, which trap animals to get their nutrients. So they're not really like eating the animals, because it's not like they get ATP from them, but they are trying to get like nitrogen and phosphorus and other minerals from the animal's dead body. So, because they live in very poor soil. So the ant's like, oh, I wonder what's in there. And he falls in, gets digested. All right. Okay, so next, so this is about angiosperm reproduction. Some of this might be rehashing stuff we already went over. Got our wasp having sex with the flower there. Okay. So, a lot of angiosperms have relationships with animals. That's kind of the special thing about them. Most other plants just use the wind or something. So, 3 F's, flowers, double fertilization, and fruits. And then, review the flower life cycle. And the flower organs again. Okay, different kinds of flowers. I think we talked about those more in lab. So, you should probably know those more for lab. Pollen grain, kind of already talked about them. That's where the male gametophytes are. The ovules is where the female gametophytes are. And then pollination is when you get them together to form a seed. Okay, and then the different kinds of flowers are pollinated by different things. And kind of rehashing stuff we already went over. Okay. And, you might want to watch that video again of plant fertilization, how the pollen tube grows, and one sperm fertilizes the egg, and the other sperm fertilizes the endosperm, and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. Okay, and then, just know the structure of the seed. You got the seed coat on the outside, you got the endosperm, you got the embryo. Know, where each of these things come from in the original ovule. Okay, then the seeds go dormant, and okay, then we got the different kinds of fruits. So you got we went over this in great detail in lab. So you really need to know this for lab. I don't think there's much on this test that's coming up about the different kinds of fruits, but in lab I'm gonna have that on lab test. Well, I'll have some actual fruits out, and you'll have to identify what kind of fruits they are.
The seed as well for a lab, or is that more of a?
You should know. Just know the basic parts of the seed, like the embryo, the endosperm, the seed coat, and know what those things develop from. The seed coat develops from the integuments. The endosperm develops from fertilization of that central cell. And then the embryo develops from the zygote and the other fertilization. Okay. Okay. And then, the fruits, their function is to disperse the seeds. Make sure I didn't miss anything here. I think that pretty much covers it. Oh, you should also know the advantages versus disadvantages of sexual and asexual reproduction, and we talked about that in lab. It was one of your homework questions. Self-fertilization, what is that? Okay. All right. Might actually get done by 9. I can go to bed. I've been teaching classes all day and I'm tired. Okay. All right. So the last one, which I think is chapter 39 or something, is plant signals and behavior. Okay. So on a cellular level, same as all cells. Probably went over this in Biology 1. Plants have hormones just like animals do. And so you're going to need to know some of the important things that each of these plant hormones do. So it has a pretty good summary of it in your book as well. The chapter summary at the end. So auxin, let's see here. Auxin, that's one of the things it does is it makes plants bend towards the light. What else? It's basically a growth hormone to different growing things grows roots and stuff like that. And then cytokinin's another growth hormone named after cytokinesis, so it causes cells to divide. And it, let's see. So it's found in actively growing things like the buds, the apical, meristem, stuff like that. Okay, the gibberellins, those promote seed germination and also fruit formation and stem growth. So you can make seedless grapes with it. And it also causes the seeds to sprout. Ethylene is a gas that causes fruit to ripen. So that's why you can use an apple to make a banana ripen, because the apple's giving off ethylene. put it in a bag with a banana, and it will make a green banana turn ripe. You have a question?
Do you think if we were to eat enough of those seedless grapes like that gibberellin would
It
make...
won't do anything to you.
Oh, like
It's
it
a
wouldn't
plant
take away my
hormone.
seeds?
Your body won't recognize it. Okay, so let's see, ethylene. So ethylene causes fruit to ripen. It causes the triple response of seedlings there, and it causes leaves to drop in the fall. Abscisic acid also causes leaves to drop, so it kind of works together with ethylene for that. And it also causes leaves to drop when there's a drought. So leaf abscission is the fancy word for leaves falling off the plant. So that's why it's called abscisic acid, because it causes leaves to absciss. If you know some of the root words, it kind of helps. Oh, and it also keeps seeds dormant. That's the other thing it does.
So when my plants have that yellow stuff, do I just cut off that part of the leaf or just the whole stem?
Oh, if the leaf's turning yellow?
Yeah. Like
Just
where the
leaf,
node is,
probably.
or just the leaf part?
Just the leaf, probably. Brasinosteroids, these are steroids for plants. We also have steroid hormones that are involved, we'll talk about later, but they're involved in sex hormones or a type of steroid. And then also, some of our stress hormones are steroids. Like corticosteroids, you might have heard of those. So brasinosteroids are steroids for plants, and they're also a stress hormone for plants. So they cause plants to kind of, strengthen up to get them ready for stress. So they cause them to grow more xylem, to increase their water uptake, stuff like that.
So is that what happens? Is that what HEB? Because at HEB during Valentine's Day, they have these strawberries that are like this big, covered in chocolate.
I'm not sure if that's what causes that. I think they might give them something though to make them that big. I don't know how they get that big. Strawberries shouldn't be that big. Some mutant strawberry or something like that. Okay. Okay, and then you have these different plant responses. So photoperiodism is the plant's ability to detect light. So that allows them to bend towards the light, which is phototropism. And that also allows them to tell like what time of day it is or what time of year it is. So, and they do that with these photoreceptors that actually change shape when different shades of light hit them. So red hits them and they change to one form. Far red hits them, they change to a different form. When we get to how the things in our eyes work, it's kind of similar. So we have rods and cones. When they absorb light, they change shape too. And when that happens in our eyes, that sends a signal to our brain. Well, when it happens in a plant, I don't know, plants don't have brains, but somehow it lets the plant know that they're supposed to grow towards the light or flower at a certain time or whatever.
What's the distinction between far red light and then red light?
So red light is like visible red light, and then far red light is like more infrared light. So in daylight, the plant is going to be getting a lot of red light, and it's going to switch its phytochrome over to this form. And then at night, it's going to be getting more far red light, which switches it back to the other form. It's kind of like an on and off switch in a way. It's one way or the other. So this way the plant can tell if it's been in the light or if it's been in the dark.
Is that why they call it infrared? Because it's like far red?
Mm-hmm.
Infrared. Oh, okay.
Yeah. Okay. So, like, this is how the seeds know if they have enough light to germinate. This is how plants in the shade know how to bend towards the sun. And this is also how plants know what time of day it is, because they can tell if it's light outside or not. And also what time of year it is, because in the summertime the days are longer than in the wintertime. So plants can actually get jet lag, because they can tell if it's daytime or nighttime. Some plants open up their leaves in the daytime and close them up at night. You can actually take this plant in a pot and fly to Europe or something, and this plant will have jet lag for a while, just like you would. It'll be opening and closing its leaves at the wrong time of day until it gets used to its new day and night cycle. So they have a circadian rhythm just like we do. And then we have the short day plants and the long day plants, but they're actually misnamed. They named them before they knew how it really worked. And it turns out that short day plants are actually long night plants, and they don't care how long the day is. And long day plants are short night plants. So you can trick them into flowering at the wrong time by shining light in the middle of the night. It only takes a few seconds, so they don't care how long the light was for, they only care how long the dark was for. Alright, gravitropism, which is how plants tell which side is up and which side is down, by the little statoliths floating around in the statocytes, and they'll sink to the bottom. That's how they tell which side is down. Thigmotropism, so that's their sense of touch, basically. So how they can tell if you have a vine climbing up something, how it can climb it up and tell if it's touching the fence, or Venus flytraps when they trap a fly, that kind of thing. Alright, plant responses to stress. So flooding causes them to do this and to grow that parenchyma, like we talked about. Responses to drought, those kind of things they do for drought. Salinity, basically what they can do, some plants anyway, they'll just increase the amount of salt in their cells to compensate for the amount of salt that's in the soil. And then heat stress, they create heat shock proteins to keep their proteins from being denatured.
Say that again about the high salinity.
Yeah, so some plants can survive high salinity in soil, like some don't, they'll just die. But some plants can actually increase the amount of solutes in their cells to kind of offset the amount of solutes that are in the soil. And so their response to heat stress is to produce heat shock proteins that protects their proteins from denaturing. So just like when you have a person who has a high fever or heat stroke, what damages that person, and they can even die of this, is that their actual enzymes are getting denatured by the excess heat. So that can also happen to plants, but some plants can survive high temperatures by making these heat shock proteins that kind of protect their other proteins from getting denatured. Cold stress, the bad thing about cold is, for one thing, it causes your cell membranes to kind of freeze up because it's made of an oily substance and it'll start to solidify. So what they do there is they change it to more unsaturated fats, which have a lower freezing point, basically. And then, to keep their water from freezing, they'll actually add a solute. Like, it's not actual antifreeze, but it's an antifreeze type molecule. It's like when you put antifreeze in your car, you're adding a solute that it's going to lower the freezing point of the water in your radiator. So same idea, if you add a solute to any water, like the water in the plant cell, it's going to lower its freezing point. So instead of freezing at 32 degrees Fahrenheit, maybe it won't freeze till the plant gets down to 20 or something like that. So that's a way that the plant can survive a freeze. Okay, and then when they get attacked by herbivores, they can defend themselves with structures like thorns or bark or trichomes or something, but also a lot of plants use chemical defenses like poisons. Alright. And then we talk about these other kind of defenses like recruiting their predators, warning other plants in the area, and all that kind of cool stuff. Okay, and then if they get attacked by a disease, you have the hypersensitive response and systemic acquired resistance. So hypersensitive response is that thing where they kill off the cells that are infected to keep the infection from spreading. And systemic acquired resistance is when they then produce defensive enzymes or toxins throughout the rest of the body of the plant. So this takes longer, but it protects the rest of the plant.
What was the first one?
The hypersensitive response, that is like a fast local thing that happens just in the area of the infection, where it basically kills that tissue that's infected. The slower, longer acting type response is SAR, the systemic acquired resistance. Alright, so that So hopefully now you'll all make A's on your test.
Follow
And
that in.
You teach well.
we'll see. I'll see
Ah.
how your test.
Yeah.
Oh, I hate being on camera.